And of course, when we ask ourselves, how does my heart beat? How do we breathe? How do I digest my food? We haven't the faintest idea. The whole procedure is...
There's an old Jewish story about a man who liked to play the violin. He had this habit, though. He kept playing the same note over and over. It amused him. Perhaps it gave him a deep ecstasy. But that was his shtick. He kept playing the same note over and over. His wife, like most wives, was tolerant. He played the same note over and over again. After several years, his wife finally got to the point where even her wifely patience was exhausted, and she said to him, "Max," she said, "Max, for God's sake, Max. Other men who play the violin, they don't always play the same part of the string. They play up and down the string, and they play on all the strings. They make melodies, and they make counterpoint, they make sonatas, they make forms, not the same note over and over." And Max looked up from playing his one note, and he said, "They're looking for the place. I found it."
Now, if you're going to be a good soldier, you've got to be alert constantly, because you never know where the attack's going to come from. Now, you know what happens to you when you try to be on the alert. You think about being alert, and then you're a hopeless prey to the enemy, because you're not alert. You're thinking about being alert. You must be simply awake and relaxed. And then all your nerve ends are working, and wherever the attack comes from, you're ready. They liken this to a barrel of water. The water is just sitting there in the barrel. But the minute you make a hole in the barrel, the water immediately is ready to come out of that hole. So in the same way, the mind, when it is in the proper state, is ready to respond in any direction from which the attack may come.
The human populations can be categorized according to their suggestibility fairly clearly. I suspect very strongly that this 20% is the same in all these cases. And I suspect also that it would not be at all difficult to recognize in very early childhood who were those who were extremely suggestible, who were those who were extremely unsuggestible, and who were those who occupied the intermediate space. Quite clearly, if everybody were extremely unsuggestible, organized society would be quite impossible. And if everybody were extremely suggestible, then dictatorship would be absolutely inevitable. I mean, it's very fortunate we have people who are moderately suggestible in the majority, and who therefore preserve us from dictatorship, but do permit organized society to be formed. But once given the fact that there are these 20% of highly suggestible people, it becomes quite clear that this is a matter of enormous political importance. For example, any demagogue who is able to get hold of a large number of these 20% of suggestible people and to organize them is really in a position to overthrow any government.
They live less than 10 years, and they never travel more than 10 miles from the place where they're born. Most mice never get more than a few miles from where they're born. Most squirrels never go more than a few miles from where they're born. Most human beings throughout history have lived about 30 years and have never gotten more than 10 miles from where they were born.
Well, it seems to me that the nature of the ultimate revolution with which we are now faced is precisely this, that we are in process of developing a whole series of techniques which will enable the controlling oligarchy, who have always existed and presumably always will exist, to get people actually to love their servitude. This is seems to me the ultimate in malevolent revolution, shall we say.
And of course, when we ask ourselves, how does my heart beat? How do we breathe? How do I digest my food? We haven't the faintest idea. The whole procedure is left.
See, Krishnamurti does this. He's a very, very clever guru. Krishnamurti says to people, now look, there is nothing you can do to be liberated, because all your efforts in the direction of liberation are phony. They are based on your desire to boost and continue your ego, and that will never lead to liberation. All you can do, he says, is to be aware of yourself as you are, without judgment. See what is. But then, if you can do that, you have no further problem. But if you try to do it, you're in the same mess all over again.
And from Newton onwards, we had the idea that it doesn't matter who you are. If you follow scientific procedure, you'll find the truth. This began to break down after 1900 due to Sigmund Freud, who pointed out that even scientists are human beings and may have neuroses, and that scientific theories may be elaborate rationalizations for neuroses, and the influence of Karl Marx, who pointed out that no matter what you're theorizing about, it's a mirror of your economic status and what your economic goals are. And then anthropologists started coming back with reports about alternative reality tunnels, showing that no matter what reality tunnel you live in, the world will organize itself in your perception.
Talks about Zen. All the other people say, because they talk about it, they don't understand it. Those, in the words of Lao Tzu, who know do not say. Those who say do not know. And yet he said that.
The religion of the 20th century is, in fact, idolatrous nationalism. That there are the nominal religions, Christianity, Mohammedanism, Hinduism, Buddhism, and so on. But in fact, if you inquire what the actions of people mean, in fact it's perfectly clear that the real religion is nationalism, that we worship the national state, that in fact we make use of the traditional religions to buttress the national state. And that new religions like communism are also used in the service of this great national idolatry. I mean, actually, Karl Marx made a grave mistake in underrating nationalism. He seems to have imagined that under the influence of socialist and communist doctrines, the masses of the people would give up nationalism. Not at all. He never foresaw what has in fact happened, that communist and socialist doctrines have become the servants of nationalism, the instruments of a particular nationalism, just in the same way in which, I'm afraid, it looks as though Orthodox Christianity and Orthodox Mohammedanism and Orthodox Judaism were fast becoming the instruments of their respective Western, Middle Eastern, or Jewish nationalism. This is one of the grave tragedies, and of course it confirms the profound wisdom which we find in the Old Testament condemning idolatry as being a thing of unutterable danger.
So in this way, you see, nothing can really be described. And yet, on the other hand, we all know perfectly well what we mean when we talk. If you shared an experience with somebody else, then of course you can talk about it. We can all talk about fire and air and water and wood because we know what it is. And there's no mystery. So in the same way, when it comes to discussing something so esoteric as Zen, it can be discussed. Only, Zen people play games with each other. They play little tricks. They test each other out by saying to somebody, I remember when I met Paul Reps for the first time, who wrote that lovely book, Zen Flesh and Zen Bones. And he said to me, well, he said, you've written quite a number of books by now. You must think you're pretty fancy. I said, I haven't said a word. This is simply a Zen game. And people sort of feel each other out. There's a poem which says, when two Zen masters meet each other on the road, they need no introduction. Thieves recognize one another instantaneously.